She had come to beg. She told herself otherwise for the entire journey, repeated it under her breath like a prayer against the rattling of the carriage wheels. But standing now before the iron fence of Ashford Hall, with the Virginia heat pressing into her shoulders like a hand, Margaret Hale understood exactly what she was doing. She was here because her younger sister had destroyed something that did not belong to her, and someone had to stand in the wreckage. That someone was always Margaret. If this story touches something in you, subscribe now and follow every part. Leave your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. The footman who answered the door had the face of a man who had spent his entire career learning to communicate contempt without a single change in expression. He looked at Margaret the way certain men looked at women who arrived unescorted, without a formal calling card, without a name worth the trouble of remembering. He looked at her and simply waited. "Miss Hale," she said, because she would not let him make her invisible. "My name is Margaret Hale, and I have come to speak with Mr. Corbin Ashford. I do not have an invitation, I am aware of that. But I would be very grateful if you would tell him I am here, and that I intend to remain until he agrees to see me." The footman blinked once. Then he stepped aside. She had not expected that. She followed him through a corridor lined with dark wood and old portraits, telling herself firmly not to take in the scale of the place, not to notice how the entrance hall alone could have swallowed her father's entire house. She fixed her eyes on the footman's back. She steadied her breathing. She reminded herself that she was the daughter of a man who had always told the truth, and that she had walked into difficult rooms before, and that the only thing a difficult room could do was test what you were made of. She already knew what she was made of. The study was at the far end of the hall. The door was open. Corbin Ashford stood at the window with his back to her when she entered, holding a folded document in one hand, as though he had been reading it and had simply chosen not to stop when she came in. He was taller than she had imagined, with a stillness about him that was not relaxed but controlled, the stillness of a man who had decided a long time ago that every movement would be intentional. "Miss Hale," he said without turning, "I expected one of you would come eventually." Margaret stopped 3 feet inside the door. She did not sit in the chair that had clearly been placed for her. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "sit down." "I prefer to stand, sir." He turned then, and Margaret understood immediately, with a clarity she did not welcome, why her sister Clara had been so profoundly foolish. Corbin Ashford was not handsome in any conventional way. He was angular where other men were soft, careful where they were easy, and his eyes were the grey of deep water before a storm that has already made up its mind. He looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at financial instruments, searching for the place where the numbers did not add up. "You prefer to stand," he said again. "Then stand." He moved to his desk and sat and folded his hands on the surface and regarded her without any expression she could read. "You are not Clara." "No, sir. I am Margaret, the elder sister, the one they kept at home." She felt the words land precisely where he had aimed them. She absorbed them and kept her face still. "The one who runs the household," she said. "Yes. And they sent you." "I came of my own deciding." Something shifted in his face, very briefly, almost nothing at all. "Did you?" Margaret drew one careful breath. "My sister behaved without honor, Mr. Ashford. She told people, she told a great many people, that you had behaved improperly toward her, that the two of you had been alone together at the Dunmore estate, and that your conduct had crossed every appropriate line." She paused. That was a lie, a deliberate and complete lie. "I have come to apologize on behalf of my family, and to ask you, not demand, not negotiate, simply to ask what it would take to settle this matter without destroying everything we have left." The silence that followed was very long. Corbin Ashford did not move. He simply watched her, and Margaret had the strange sensation of being read, not her face or her clothes, or the absence of fashionable jewelry at her throat, but something underneath all of that, something she had not offered up for inspection. "Sit down, Miss Hale," he said again, and this time it was not quite an order. She sat. He opened a drawer and placed a leather folder on the desk between them. "Your father borrowed $1,400 from the Ashford Agricultural Trust in the spring of 1814. The terms were clearly stated: full repayment within 4 years with standard compounding interest." He opened the folder and slid it toward her. "It is now the summer of 1818. The debt has not been settled. The interest has accumulated. The current figure, as of this week, is $1,860. Margaret had known about the debt. She had not known the precise current figure. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her expression entirely steady. "Your sister's accusation," he continued, "was circulated in 3 separate households before a correction was issued. My attorney has informed me that under Virginia law, written defamation of character, and your sister committed it in writing, multiple letters, is fully actionable. The damages I could reasonably pursue would exceed $2,500. "That would end us entirely," Margaret said. "Yes," Corbin said. "It would." She looked at him directly. "Is that your intention?" "My intention," he said, "is to hear what you have to say. That is why I allowed you in." Margaret breathed once, slowly and deliberately. "Then I will say this plainly. My sister acted out of social ambition and a very poor understanding of consequences. She is 19 years old. She is not wicked. She is thoughtless, which I understand may feel like the same thing from where you are sitting." She paused. "My father is not a dishonest man. He borrowed that money in good faith, and circumstances have made repayment difficult. That is not an excuse. It is a fact. I came here to understand the actual shape of the problem before proposing any solution, because in my experience, people who propose solutions before understanding problems tend to make everything worse." Corbin Ashford looked at her for a long moment. Then, without speaking, he slid the leather folder across the desk toward her. "Take a look," he said, "since you came to understand the problem." She reached for it. Margaret had been managing her father's household accounts since she was 16. The land steward, who had worked the property before his retirement, had taught her double-entry bookkeeping out of sheer necessity, and she had absorbed it the way she absorbed most practical things, completely and without drama. She had in 3 consecutive years identified errors in the county tax assessments and successfully appealed each one. She opened the folder and began to read. The room was quiet for several minutes. A clock on the mantel counted the seconds. Outside somewhere a horse moved in the yard. Corbin Ashford said nothing, and Margaret was dimly aware that he was watching her, not impatiently, but with the focused attention of a man who had decided something was worth observing closely. Then she found it. She went back. She checked the column again, cross-referenced it against the compounding calculation at the bottom of the 2nd page. And then she looked up. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "your clerk has made an arithmetic error." She turned the folder and slid it back toward him, placing her finger precisely on the relevant line. The interest was calculated on the compounded balance as of January 1817, but this notation here indicates that a partial payment was made in March of that year. The payment was recorded in the ledger, but was not subtracted before the next compounding calculation was performed, which means the current figure you have quoted me is overstated. He looked at the page. He looked at it for a long time. "By how much?" he said. "By approximately $290, Margaret said. "Possibly 300, depending on the precise date the payment was received." The silence that followed was different from the one before it. It had a different weight entirely. Corbin Ashford reached into the lower drawer of his desk and removed a separate ledger. He found the March entry. He ran the calculation himself on a clean piece of paper with a precise, small handwriting that revealed absolutely nothing about what he was feeling. He looked at the result. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. $294, he said. "Yes," Margaret said. He set the pencil down. My clerk has reviewed that file 3 separate times, he said. Your clerk, Margaret said carefully, may be more comfortable with legal language than with arithmetic. The error requires cross-referencing 2 separate entries from different months. Most people reading a document of this kind would not think to do that. But you did. I manage accounts, Mr. Ashford. It is what I do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the corrected debt is $1,566. Yes, Margaret said. That is still a considerable sum. Yes, he said, it is. He leaned back in his chair, not relaxing but recalibrating, adjusting something in the way he was approaching this conversation. She could almost see it happening, the way a careful man revises his calculations when a variable changes unexpectedly. Miss Hale, he said, I would like to ask you something, and I would like you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer reflects poorly on your circumstances. I will do my best, she said. How many of your father's accounts are you currently managing? All of them, she said. Has the land steward position been filled since the previous man retired? No. Are you being compensated for this work? The question surprised her. She had not expected it. Had not expected him to veer so far from the subject of her sister's lie and her family's debt into something that landed with the particular force of a question no one had ever thought to ask before. I am part of the household, she said. It is not the same as employment. No, he said, it is not. It is considerably less. Something moved through his expression then, not pity, not quite anger, but something that lived in the neighborhood of both. Margaret said nothing. He stood and moved back to the window, and she had the impression he needed a moment to think in a direction she could not follow. She waited. She was very good at waiting. I am going to make you a proposal, he said, without turning around. I came to discuss my sister's behavior and my father's debt, Margaret said. I know why you came. His voice was still even, but there was something underneath it now, something that had not been there when she first walked in. I am telling you the conversation has changed, and I am asking you to listen. Margaret pressed her hands flat against her skirts. I am listening, she said. He turned back to face her, and in the afternoon light coming through the study window, his expression was entirely unreadable. And yet she had the strange certainty that whatever he was about to say, he had not planned it this morning. Your family owes me $1,566, he said. Your sister has damaged my reputation across 3 households. Your father has no land steward, and based on what I just watched you do in under 5 minutes, he has not needed one, because you have been performing that work without title, without pay, and without, he paused, a single word of acknowledgement from anyone. Margaret's jaw tightened. I have a proposal, he said, that resolves all of these problems at once, but it requires a permanent decision, and I want you to understand that before I say another word. The clock ticked. The summer heat pressed against the glass. Margaret Hale looked at Corbin Ashford across the width of his study, with her family's debt hanging between them like a blade, and said the only thing that remained to say. Then say it. He held her gaze. Marry me. The words landed without ceremony, without softness, without any of the decorative language that such words were supposed to carry. He said them the way he had stated the debt figure, clearly, precisely as a fact he had decided to introduce into the conversation. Margaret did not speak for a long moment. You cannot be serious, she said. I am always serious. You do not know me. I know, he said, that you rode to this house without a chaperone, without an invitation, and without a finished plan, to apologize for someone else's mistake. I know you sat in that chair and read a financial document without any visible distress. I know you found an arithmetic error that 3 trained men missed, and I know, he paused, that you have been running a household and an estate on nothing but obligation and invisible effort for longer than anyone has thought to ask about, and that no one in your family has once considered whether that was fair to you. Margaret felt something shift in her chest, something she pressed firmly back down. A marriage, she said carefully, is not compensation for unpaid labor. No, he agreed. It is a contract, and I am proposing one with specific terms. He moved back to the desk. Your family's debt erased in full. Your brother Thomas's education at the college secured and funded. Your sister's social standing protected, which is more than she has earned, but which you clearly feel responsible for regardless. He paused. In return, you manage the Ashford estates. Full authority over the accounts, the land steward staff, and all household operations. You hold the title of Mrs. Ashford, and you are not required to pretend that this began as anything other than what it is. She stared at him. And what is it? A practical arrangement between two people who are each in need of something the other can provide, he said. I need someone competent. You need security. That is not a romantic beginning. But it is an honest one. Margaret looked at her hands. She thought of her father, whose hands shook now when he signed documents. She thought of Thomas, who was 17 and genuinely brilliant, and who had been told last winter that the college was beyond their reach. She thought of Clara, who had caused this entire catastrophe with the breezy certainty of someone who had always had someone else to clean up behind her. And she thought of herself, standing in a stranger's study in the summer heat, negotiating the terms of her own future, as though it were a ledger entry, which she supposed it essentially was. I want it in writing, she said. Something crossed his face, very brief, very controlled. Of course, he said. All of it. Every term, every obligation on both sides witnessed and signed before a justice. Agreed, she said. And one more condition. You will not lie to me about anything. Not the accounts, not the estate, not your intentions, not your opinions. If you disagree with something I have done, you will say so directly, and I will do the same. Corbin Ashford looked at her for a long moment. Miss Hale, he said, that is the first condition anyone has ever attached to an offer from me. Is it acceptable? The silence held for 3 full seconds. Yes, he said, it is. Margaret Hale stood up from the chair that was not quite comfortable in the study of a man she had known for less than an hour, in the long gold light of a Virginia summer afternoon. Then I accept, she said, and neither of them smiled, and neither of them reached out a hand, and the clock on the mantel counted on, indifferent, as though nothing had happened at all. But something had, something that could not be undone. If you are still with this story, leave a comment and tell me what you think Margaret should have done differently. Your perspective matters, and I read every single one. The document was signed 3 days later. Margaret read it 4 times before she put her name to it. She made 2 corrections, one to a clause about household expenditure authority that she found ambiguous, and one to the timeline for Thomas's tuition payment, which she wanted structured in annual installments rather than a single transfer. Corbin accepted both changes without argument, which unsettled her more than if he had pushed back. A man who argued showed you where his limits were. A man who simply agreed told you nothing at all. The justice of the peace was a tired man named Cromwell who smelled of pipe smoke and wanted to be elsewhere. He read the vows in a flat, practiced voice, waited for the appropriate responses, recorded the marriage in his ledger, and wished them well in a tone that suggested he did not particularly mean it. Margaret's father had not come. He had sent a letter instead. 2 careful paragraphs expressing gratitude to Mr. Ashford for his generosity and his hope that Margaret would conduct herself with appropriate dignity in her new position. He had signed it, Reverend Hale, as though she were a business acquaintance rather than his eldest daughter. She folded the letter, put it in her coat pocket, and did not look at it again. Clara had not come either. Clara had locked herself in her bedroom when Margaret told her what had been arranged and said through the door that Margaret had always wanted to take everything from her, and that this only proved it. Margaret had stood in the hallway for a long moment with her hand flat against the wood. Then she had gone downstairs and finished packing. She arrived at Ashford Hall on a Tuesday morning with 1 trunk, a leather satchel of her personal account books, and no illusions whatsoever. The housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, met her at the door with the expression of a woman who had been informed of a situation she had not been consulted about and intended to form her own opinions regardless of what anyone said. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, and the title sat strange in the air between them. "Mrs. Finch," Margaret said, and shook her hand directly, the way she shook the hands of tradesmen and surveyors, and watched the housekeeper recalibrate slightly. "I would like to see the household accounts before anything else," Margaret said, "not the rooms, the books. I understand there is a room set aside for estate management." "There is, ma'am." "Good. After the accounts, the tour. And I would appreciate your honest assessment of what needs the most attention. I am not interested in what looks well. I am interested in what is actually working." Mrs. Finch looked at her for a moment with the measuring expression of a woman who had spent her professional life working for difficult employers and was deciding which category this one belonged to. "The Eastern Drainage Channel," she said finally. "It has been wrong for 2 full seasons, and the overseer keeps telling Mr. Ashford it will sort itself." "It will not sort itself," Margaret said. "No, ma'am, it will not." Something shifted between them, subtle but real. "Show me the books first," Margaret said, "and then take me to the eastern field." Corbin was not in the house. She did not see him until dinner that evening, and when he came in, dusty from riding and smelling of horses and summer heat, he stopped in the doorway of the dining room when he saw her already seated with her account book open beside her plate. He looked for just a moment as though he had forgotten she was going to be there. "You have been at the books all day," he said. It was not a question. "I have," Margaret said. "I also walked the eastern field." He pulled out his chair and sat. "What did you find?" "The drainage problem is not a drainage problem," she said. "It is a grading problem. The field was leveled incorrectly when it was expanded, I believe around 1814, based on the expense records. The water is not draining because the elevation is wrong along the northern edge. It needs to be regraded. That is the actual fix." Corbin picked up his fork and looked at her across the table. "My overseer called it a drainage problem." "Your overseer," Margaret said, "is not wrong that water is collecting where it should not. He is wrong about why. There is a difference, and the fix is 4 days of work with the right crew. I have written out the specifications." She slid a folded paper across the table. "The cost is approximately $50. If you leave it another season, you will lose that field entirely to root damage, and the loss of yield will cost you considerably more than that." Corbin unfolded the paper. He read it slowly. She watched his eyes move, precise and methodical, and watched one small line appear briefly between his brows before smoothing away. "You wrote these specifications yourself?" "Yes, today, after the books." He was quiet for a moment. Then he set the paper down and resumed eating, and said in a completely neutral tone, "I will speak to the overseer in the morning." It was not nothing. That was how the first week went. Margaret worked. Corbin observed. They ate dinner together every evening with the careful, calibrated politeness of 2 people who had agreed on a set of terms and were both determined not to be the first to violate them. She found 3 more accounting errors before the end of the week, none as significant as the first, but each one real, each one costing Ashford money through simple imprecision. She corrected them without announcement and left a note of explanation in the margin of each relevant ledger page. On Friday morning, she found the notes had been read. She knew because the pages had been turned down at the corners. A small thing, almost nothing, but she noticed it and filed it away with the same precision she gave everything else on Sunday. He asked if she rode. They were in the entrance hall, and he was pulling on his gloves. And the question came out with the tone of something that had been considered and then released, as though he had talked himself into asking it at the last moment. "I do," she said. Come then, she had not been on horseback in 7 months. There had been no time, no horse available, no occasion that justified the indulgence, but she did not say any of that. She went and changed into her riding clothes and came down in 11 minutes, and she saw something cross his face when she appeared. Something quick and unguarded before the familiar controlled expression settled back into place. They rode for 2 hours across the eastern portion of the estate, and he showed her the property boundaries in a way that was half practical and half something else she could not name. He pointed out where the timber rights ended, where the creek marked the county line, where there had once been a plan for a second mill that had never been executed. He talked about the land the way her father talked about scripture, like something that genuinely mattered and not because of its market value. She filed that away, too. On the ride back, he said without preamble, "The overseer began the regrading this morning." "I know," Margaret said. "I checked before breakfast." He glanced at her sideways. "Of course you did." "No," he said. It was efficient. She almost smiled. She caught it before it fully formed and looked forward at the road. It was during the second week that the first letter arrived from town. It came in the Morning Post addressed to Mrs. Corbin Ashford in handwriting Margaret did not recognize. She opened it at the estate desk and read it once quickly, and then again slowly. It was from a woman named Mrs. Grantham, one of the 3 households Corbin had mentioned on the first day, one of the 3 places where Clara's lie had spread. The letter was 3 paragraphs of exquisitely polite language arranged to deliver one message: that Margaret's sudden marriage had not gone unnoticed, that questions were being asked about the nature and timing of the arrangement, and that Mrs. Grantham herself could not in good conscience ignore the implication that the marriage had been conducted under some form of financial coercion. Margaret set the letter down. She picked up her pen. She wrote back in clear, measured sentences, and she did not defend herself, and she did not explain herself, and she did not apologize. She stated 2 facts: that the marriage had been conducted with the full agreement of both parties and witnessed by a justice, and that the financial terms of the arrangement were private, as was customary in all marriages involving property. She thanked Mrs. Grantham for her concern and wished her a pleasant summer. She signed it Eleanor Hale Ashford. She sealed it before she could think better of it and gave it to the household boy to post and went back to the accounts. She did not tell Corbin. She told herself it was because the matter was resolved. She did not examine that reasoning too carefully. But 2 days later, he came into the estate office without knocking, the first time he had done that, and set a letter on the desk in front of her, without speaking. It was from Mrs. Grantham, addressed to him, and it said, among other things, that his new wife had responded to a private communication with what Mrs. Grantham characterized as unsettling composure for a woman in her position. Margaret read it. She set it down. She met his eyes. "She wrote to you as well," she said. "She did." His voice was even. "You did not tell me. She had written to you first. I handled it. You handled a social communication from one of Virginia's most well-connected women without mentioning it to me." Yes, she held his gaze. Was I wrong? The question sat between them. His jaw was tight, not angry, she thought, but working through something that lived adjacent to anger, the way a man works through a problem that has turned out to be more complicated than he anticipated. "No," he said finally. "Your response was correct. But you would have liked to know." He did not answer immediately, which she had learned was its own kind of answer. "I would have liked," he said carefully, "to not find out from her second letter." "That is fair," Margaret said. "I will tell you in the future." "Good." He picked up the letter and turned to leave, and she said without quite planning to Mr. Ashford. He stopped. "She is going to write again," Margaret said, "Mrs. Grantham, and she will not be the only one. Whatever Clara set in motion is still moving, and the fact that we married quickly is going to look to certain people like confirmation of something." She paused. "We should discuss how we want to handle it." He turned back fully. He looked at her with that evaluating expression, the one that was not quite skepticism and not quite trust, and lived somewhere in the complicated territory between them. "What do you propose? Nothing dramatic?" she said. "Drama would make it worse." What I propose is that we appear in the appropriate social settings as two people who made a practical decision together and are not ashamed of it because we are not." She met his eyes steadily. "Are we?" Something moved through his expression that she could not read. "No," he said, "we are not." "Then we go to church Sunday," she said. "We accept whatever social invitations arrive in August. We are polite and composed, and we do not volunteer information, and we do not apologize for existing." She paused. "And if someone asks a pointed question, we answer it plainly and briefly and move on." Corbin Ashford looked at his wife across the estate office desk and was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to be meaningful. "You have thought about this," he said. "I think about most things," Margaret said. "That is becoming apparent." He straightened. "Sunday then?" "Sunday," she said. The church service was not as difficult as Margaret had anticipated. It was more difficult in a different way. Not hostile glances or whispered cruelties which she had prepared for, but a particular quality of scrutiny that was harder to defend against, because it wore the face of pleasantness. Every handshake was an assessment. Every question about how she was settling in was a probe for weakness. She answered pleasantly. She revealed nothing. She stood beside Corbin with the composed stillness of a woman who had decided long ago that other people's opinions of her were information and not verdicts. On the walk out of the church, a man named Percy Dunmore fell into step beside Corbin with the practiced ease of someone who had never had to worry about what people thought of him and therefore thought about it constantly. "Blackwood," he said with a wide smile, and then corrected himself. "Ashford, forgive me, and Mrs. Ashford, what a surprise this all has been." He shook Margaret's hand with the particular grip of a man gauging something. "We have all been most curious about the circumstances. Have you?" Corbin said. It was not a question. His voice had not changed, but something in it had shifted a degree colder, a degree flatter. Dunmore continued regardless. "A special license and everything. Quite the gesture." He looked at Margaret with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You must have made quite an impression. Mr. Ashford and I found that we had complementary needs and compatible values," Margaret said pleasantly. "In such cases, speed seems more practical than delay. Do you not think?" Dunmore blinked. "I suppose, and you will find," she added in the same conversational tone, "that we are both rather practical people, so the curiosity, while understandable, may not produce the kind of story anyone is hoping for." She smiled, and it was a real smile, and it was also a dismissal. "It was lovely to meet you, Mr. Dunmore." She turned slightly toward Corbin, just a degree, just enough, and he moved with it, and they walked together toward the carriage, with the synchronization of two people who had been married for years rather than weeks. In the carriage, neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Corbin said, "Complementary needs and compatible values. Was it too much?" "It was exactly right," he said, and something in his voice, buried beneath the evenness, sounded like something she was not yet certain she had permission to identify. She looked out the window at the road back toward the estate and told herself that the warmth she felt in her chest was nothing more than the satisfaction of a problem handled well. She was almost certain she was right. Almost. The August social season arrived in Virginia like an uninvited guest who had decided to stay. 3 dinner invitations came in the first week alone. Margaret accepted 2 and declined the third, the one from Mrs. Grantham, on the grounds of a prior household commitment that did not exist. Corbin raised an eyebrow when she told him, and she said simply, "Not yet," and he accepted that without further question, which was one of the things she was beginning to value about him without quite meaning to. The first dinner was at the Pemberton estate, hosted by a couple who were old friends of Corbin's, and who received Margaret with the guarded warmth of people who cared about someone and were not yet certain about the person he had chosen. Margaret understood this. She answered every question honestly and asked several of her own, and by the end of the evening, Mrs. Pemberton had pulled her aside to say in a low, impressed voice that she had not expected Corbin to find someone so sensible, and that she meant it as the highest possible compliment. Margaret said she would take it that way. She meant it. The second dinner was harder. Percy Dunmore was there, which she had not anticipated, and he had brought with him a piece of information he deployed over the fish course, with the careful timing of a man who had been waiting for exactly the right moment. "I had a letter from the capital this week," he said, addressing the table generally but looking at Margaret specifically. "From a cousin who moves in some of the better circles there. Apparently, there has been some conversation about the Ashford marriage." He paused. "Some people are saying, and I want to be clear, I am only repeating what I heard, that there was a financial arrangement at the foundation of the whole thing, that the Hale family debt was essentially the basis of the union." The table went quiet in the particular way. Tables go quiet when something has been said that everyone will pretend not to have heard and discuss in detail on the carriage ride home. Margaret set her fork down. She did not look at Corbin. She did not need to. "Mr. Dunmore," she said in a voice that was perfectly pleasant and carried clearly to both ends of the table, "most marriages in Virginia involve some financial consideration. Land transfers, property agreements, family arrangements. I am not certain why ours would be remarkable in that respect. Well, the speed of it. We are practical people," she said. "We have established that." She picked up her fork again. "The fish is excellent, Mrs. Pemberton." It worked. The moment passed. The conversation shifted, but under the table, Corbin's hand moved once, just a brief involuntary motion, his fingers brushing the back of her hand before he pulled back. She felt it like a small shock, like touching metal in cold air. Neither of them acknowledged it. On the carriage ride home, Corbin was quiet for longer than usual. "You did not need to do that," he said finally. "I know," Margaret said. "I wanted to." Another pause. "Why?" She considered the question honestly the way she considered everything. "Because it was my name they were questioning as much as yours," she said, "and I am not in the habit of letting other people speak for me." He turned to look at her in the dark of the carriage, and she could not see his expression clearly, but she felt the quality of his attention, focused, careful, the way he looked at things he wanted to understand completely. "No," he said quietly, "I do not imagine you are." They arrived home, and at the door of the manor Corbin said good night with a formality that felt for the first time slightly forced, as though the natural thing would have been something else, and he had chosen this instead. Margaret went to bed and lay awake for a long time looking at the ceiling, thinking about the back of her hand. The letter from Clara arrived on a Thursday. Margaret recognized the handwriting immediately, the looping, dramatic script her sister had cultivated in adolescence and never abandoned. She opened it at the estate desk alone in the early morning before Corbin came down. It was 4 pages long. The first 2 pages were an account of how unfairly Clara had been treated by the entire situation. The third page was a series of thinly veiled accusations that Margaret had engineered the marriage to secure her own position at the family's expense. The 4th page was a request for money, not framed as a request, but framed as a reminder that the contract guaranteed Clara's social standing, and that maintaining social standing required funds, and that Margaret, as Mrs. Ashford, was surely in a position to be generous. Margaret read it all 4 times. Then she folded it, put it in the locked drawer of the estate desk, and went to breakfast. She did not tell Corbin. She sent Clara $25 with a note of 3 sentences. The note said she hoped Clara was well, that the $25 was a gift and not a precedent, and that she would appreciate it if Clara did not contact Mr. Ashford directly on any matter without speaking to Margaret first. She did not hear back. That silence worried her more than a reply would have. The 3rd week of August brought an unexpected development in the form of a man named Roland Vance. He arrived at Ashford Hall on a Wednesday afternoon without announcing himself, which told Margaret something immediately. Men who arrived at the homes of wealthy landowners without prior notice were either very confident or very reckless, and both categories required careful attention. Corbin received him in the front parlor, and Margaret was not invited to join them. She went to the estate office and worked on timber rights documentation and told herself the closed door was not her concern. 40 minutes later, Corbin came to find her. His expression was controlled in the specific way she had learned, meant something had happened that he had not expected. He stood in the doorway and said, "Do you have a moment?" "Of course," she said, and put down her pen. He came in and sat across from her, not at the desk, not in the formal arrangement of their early conversations, but in the chair beside the window, the one she had started to think of as the thinking chair, because she had noticed he used it when something was bothering him. "Vance is a land speculator," he said. "He has been acquiring properties along the western county line for 3 years. He came today with an offer on the Ashford Timber Holdings, the northern section, 280 acres. "What kind of offer?" "A generous one," Corbin said. "Suspiciously so." Margaret picked up her pen, not to write with, but to have something in her hand. What does he want with 280 acres of timber that he is willing to overpay for? That, Nathaniel said, is the question. He looked at her. He mentioned something else. He said there is a state road plan being drawn up in the capital, a new route connecting the northern counties to the main city. If the route goes where Vance seems to think it is going, the northern timber section would become extremely valuable, not as timber land, but as road access property. Margaret was quiet for a moment, and he wants to buy it before that becomes public knowledge. Yes. Does he know that you know? He was careful, Corbin said, but not careful enough. She thought about it. Who in the capital would have access to the road planning documents? 3 or 4 men, Corbin said. I know one of them slightly, a man named Fairfield on the State Infrastructure Committee. Write to him, Margaret said. Not about Vance. A general inquiry. Mention that you are considering some improvements to the northern section and would appreciate any information about planned state projects in that area. Keep it casual. Corbin looked at her for a long moment. That will signal that we know something. It will signal, she said, that you are not uninformed. Which is different. She met his eyes. If the road plan is real, Fairfield will either confirm it or become suddenly unavailable. Either answer is useful. Something happened in Corbin's expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something moving in that direction, brief and quickly controlled. You think like a surveyor, he said. I grew up with one, she said. My father's land steward. He taught me that the shape of what people do not say is as important as what they do. Corbin leaned back in the chair. I will write to Fairfield today. Good, she said. And tell Vance you need 2 weeks to consider the offer. Not longer. That looks like you are waiting for competing bids. 2 weeks looks like due diligence. He stood. 2 weeks. Yes, she confirmed. He was at the door when he stopped, and she had come to recognize this pattern, these paused exits, these extra moments at the threshold. He turned back and said, Margaret. It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked up. Thank you, he said, simply, plainly, without the careful neutral wrapping he usually put around everything. She held his gaze for 1 beat longer than necessary. It is what I am here for, she said. He nodded once and left. She sat very still after he was gone, and told herself firmly that the fact that her name in his mouth had felt like something was entirely irrelevant. The letter from the capital arrived 9 days later. It was not from Fairfield, it was from a woman named Vivian Cross, addressed to Mrs. Corbin Ashford, and Margaret opened it with the professional attention she gave all correspondence. Then she read it. Then she read it again. Then she sat very quietly for what she estimated was approximately 3 minutes. Vivian Cross wrote with the polished ease of a woman, accustomed to being the most interesting person in any room. She wrote to introduce herself as an old acquaintance of Corbin's, from his time in the capital, 7 years ago. She was careful to say acquaintance, underlined lightly the the kind of underlining that meant the opposite. She wrote that she had heard such interesting things about his marriage, and that she hoped Margaret was settling comfortably into Ashford Hall, and that she intended to call on them in September, and was so very much looking forward to meeting the woman who had, as she put it, captured Corbin Ashford's practical heart. Practical heart. Margaret folded the letter. She put it in the locked drawer with Clara's. She was still sitting there 20 minutes later, when Mrs. Finch appeared in the doorway. "Ma'am," she said, "there is a boy come from the post office. He says there is a piece in the Richmond paper. He thought you would want to know before Mr. Ashford saw it." Margaret stood. "Bring me the paper." It was page 3, a society column, the kind that dressed gossip in the language of civic concern. The item was 4 sentences long and did not name Corbin or Margaret directly. It referred to a prominent Virginia landowner who had recently contracted a hasty marriage with a woman from a family known to carry significant debt, and speculated, in the elegantly indirect language of people who know exactly what they are doing, about what practical considerations might have motivated such an unusual arrangement. Margaret read it standing, which was how she read things she needed to process quickly. Then she sat down, then she stood up again. Then Corbin came through the door. He had already seen it. She could tell by the set of his jaw, not angry, not yet, but close in the way a calm surface is close to what is moving underneath it. He had the paper in his hand, and he set it on the desk between them without speaking. They both looked at it. "It could be coincidence," Margaret said, though she did not believe it. "It is not coincidence," Corbin said, and he did not believe it either, and they both knew that, so the sentence functioned mostly as confirmation that they were seeing the same thing. "Someone provided this information," Margaret said. "Someone who knew the specific details of the debt, the timeline, and enough about our arrangement to characterize it this way." She looked at the paper. "That is a short list of people." Corbin was quiet. She could see him going through the list the same way she was, and she could see him arrive as she had arrived at the same name. "Your sister," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a conclusion, possibly, Margaret said, or someone Clara spoke to who then passed it along. Clara is not strategic enough to contact a newspaper directly. But she is careless enough to say things to the wrong person, or the right person, Corbin said, depending on whose interest you are considering. She looked at him. "You are thinking of Vance. He has contacts in the capital. He would benefit from your reputation being questioned while his offer is still on the table. A man distracted by controversy is less likely to pursue thorough due diligence." Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, but the particular chill of recognizing a coordinated problem. "He is also less likely to hold a firm negotiating position," she said. "Yes. Then this is not just gossip," she said. "This is pressure." "Yes." She looked at the paper again. 4 sentences designed to do maximum damage with minimum provocation, the kind of thing that could not be directly refuted because it made no direct claim. It was perfectly calibrated, and that precision told her that whoever had shaped it knew exactly what they were doing. "We cannot respond publicly," she said. "No, and we cannot do nothing." "No," he agreed. She put her hand flat on the paper as though she could press the words back into silence. "Then we do 2 things at once," she said. "We continue with Vance, exactly as planned. Write to Fairfield, hold the 2-week line, give him nothing. And separately, we find out who at the paper received this information and trace it back." She paused. "Do you have anyone in the capital you trust completely?" "My attorney," Corbin said, "a man named Samuel Ward." "Write to him today," Margaret said. "Not about the article, about the road plan. Give him Vance's name and ask him to look into any connection between Vance and anyone on the infrastructure committee. If that connection exists, it will also tell us who is feeding information and where." "You think Vance and the article are connected?" "I think," Margaret said carefully, "that it is a significant coincidence that a piece of gossip specifically designed to distract you appeared 9 days after you received a land offer You declined to accept immediately, and I do not like coincidences." The silence that followed was not the silence of two people who had run out of things to say. It was the silence of two people standing on the same side of something, which was a different thing entirely. "I will write to Ward this afternoon," Corbin said. "And I will write to my father," Margaret said, though the words cost her something. "He will know if Clara has been talking. He notices things even when he pretends not to." Corbin picked up the paper. He folded it. He moved toward the door, and then he stopped, that threshold habit of his, and said without turning all the way around, "Margaret, yes. This did not begin the way either of us planned," he said. "But I want you to know, whatever comes of the Vance situation, whatever comes of this," he paused, and she heard in the pause the effort of a man choosing words with more care than usual. "I do not regret the contract." She waited until she was certain her voice was steady. "Neither do I," she said. He left, and Margaret Hale Ashford sat alone in the estate office, with the folded paper on the desk before her, and the locked drawer beside her, and 6 weeks of careful, deliberate, practical partnership pressing against something inside her that she was not ready to name. Outside, a carriage she did not recognize was coming up the long drive toward the house. The carriage belonged to Vivian Cross. Margaret knew it before the door opened. She watched from the estate office window for exactly 3 seconds. Then she closed the account book in front of her, put her pen in its holder, and went to the door before Mrs. Finch could get there first. Vivian Cross was perhaps 33, with the kind of beauty that had been weaponized for so long it had become entirely unconscious. She stepped down from the carriage in a traveling dress the color of deep water, and when she saw Margaret standing in the doorway, she smiled with the warmth of a woman who had decided before arriving exactly how this encounter was going to go. "Mrs. Ashford," she said. "I hope I am not inconvenient." "Not at all," Margaret said. "Please come in." She said it the way she said everything, plainly, without performance, and she watched Vivian recalibrate slightly, the way people always recalibrated when Margaret failed to respond with the expected register of emotion. They sat in the front parlor. Margaret called for tea. She asked about the journey from the capital. Vivian answered with the practiced ease of a woman who was excellent at small talk and using it to observe things. And Margaret answered with the practiced ease of a woman who had grown up managing conversations between difficult people and had long ago learned how to give the impression of openness while revealing nothing of consequence. "Nathaniel and I were close once," Vivian said after the first cup, dropping the given name with the precision of someone placing a chess piece. "I imagine he has mentioned me." "He has not," Margaret said pleasantly. "But we are both rather private people. I imagine there is a great deal we have not yet discussed." Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. Not anger, she was too controlled for that, but recalculation. "How refreshing," she said. "Most married couples I know cannot stop talking about each other. We prefer to let our actions speak," Margaret said. "It saves time." Vivian smiled and set down her cup. "I will be direct then, since we are clearly both capable of it. Please." "I came because I was curious," Vivian said. "Corbin Ashford declined every form of female companionship for 7 years as a matter of well-documented personal policy. And then within 6 weeks he marries a woman no one in the capital has heard of, under circumstances that even his closest associates find puzzling." She tilted her head. "I wanted to see for myself what kind of woman managed that, and," Margaret said, "I am still deciding," Vivian said, but there was something in her voice, not hostility, not quite respect, but something moving in that direction that Margaret filed away carefully. "Take your time," Margaret said. "Would you like more tea?" Corbin appeared at the parlor door 20 minutes later, and Margaret watched his face go through 3 distinct phases in the space of 2 seconds. Recognition, restraint, and then a careful neutrality that told her everything about what Vivian Cross had once been to him. "Vivian," he said. "Corbin." She rose to greet him with the ease of long familiarity, and Margaret sat still and watched them with the dispassionate attention of a woman who had learned to read the space between people as readily as she read ledger columns. There was history there, complicated history, the kind that does not resolve cleanly. But there was also something finished about it, something that had been put down a long time ago and had stayed down. She could see it in the way he stood, slightly angled away, pleasant but not warm, not cold either. "Just done." That was useful information. "I was just getting acquainted with your wife," Vivian said. "She is remarkable, Corbin. I mean that sincerely." "I know," he said. He said it without hesitation, and Margaret felt something move in her chest that she was getting less successful at ignoring. Vivian left before dinner with a social invitation extended and accepted. As the carriage disappeared down the drive, Corbin came to stand beside Margaret at the door. "I should have told you about her," he said. "Yes," Margaret agreed. "You should have." A pause. "I was not certain it was relevant." "It was relevant," she said, "not because of anything she represents now, but because knowing the shape of someone's past helps you understand their present." She glanced at him. "I would have preferred to know before she arrived." "That is fair," he said. "Was she important to you?" The question came out more directly than she had intended. She saw him register that, saw the small shift in his posture, the way he chose his next words with greater care than usual. "She was," he said, "a long time ago, and then she made a choice that told me something I needed to know about her." And that was the end of it. Margaret did not ask what the choice was. Something told her she did not need to, and that asking would be reaching past the boundary of what he was ready to offer. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "That is all." "That is all," she said. "You answered honestly. That is what I asked for." He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly he said, "You are not what I expected, Margaret." She looked at him steadily. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to categorize," he said. She turned and went back inside because, if she stood there any longer in the late afternoon heat with him looking at her like that, she was going to do something the contract did not provide for, and that she was not yet ready to examine. The letter from Samuel Ward arrived 4 days later. Margaret was alone in the estate office when it came, and she needed approximately 30 seconds after reading it before she could arrange her face into anything resembling composure. Ward had done what she asked. He had looked into Vance. He had found the connection to the infrastructure committee, a cousin, as it turned out, sitting on the exact subcommittee responsible for the Northern Road route. He had confirmed that the road plan was real, that the route would pass directly through the northern timber section, and that the land value would increase by a conservative estimate of 400% within 3 years of the route's announcement. But that was not what required the 30 seconds. What required the 30 seconds was the second page. Ward had, in the course of his investigation, cross-referenced Vance's recent capital contacts, and among those contacts, appearing twice in the previous month, once at a dinner party and once at a private meeting that Ward had confirmed through a trusted clerk, was a name Margaret recognized: Clara Hale. Her sister had met with Roland Vance twice in the capital in the weeks immediately preceding both the newspaper item and Vance's offer on the timber section. Margaret sat with that for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and went to find Corbin. She did not run. She had never run from anything in her life, and was not going to start now. But she walked faster than usual, and when she found him in the stables talking to the overseer about the regraded eastern field, she waited with the stillness of a woman holding something fragile and explosive very carefully. And when he looked at her and read her expression, and he could read her expression now, she had noticed that, the way he had learned to find the signal beneath the surface, he excused himself immediately. They went to the estate office. She gave him Ward's letter. She watched him read it. She watched him reach the second page. She watched his jaw set. "Your sister," he said. "Yes." She gave Vance the information about our debt, about the timeline, about the terms. His voice was even in the way that meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. She gave it to him deliberately. "It appears so," Margaret said. "Why? I do not know exactly," she said. "But I have a letter from Clara in the locked drawer of this desk that suggests she is angry enough and desperate enough to cause damage. She may not have fully understood what Vance was going to do with the information, but she knew it would hurt us." Corbin looked at her. "You had a letter from her. You did not tell me." "No," she said. "She did not." "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because I was trying to protect her, and trying to protect you from having to make a decision about her before I understood what she was actually doing." She paused. "I was wrong not to tell you. I am telling you now." He said nothing for a moment. She watched the effort it cost him, the discipline of a man who had trained himself never to react before he had processed, finding that discipline more difficult than usual. "What does the letter say?" he said finally. She unlocked the drawer and gave it to him. He read it standing, and when he was done, he set it on the desk with the particular careful deliberateness of a man who does not want to show how hard something has landed. "She asked you for money," he said. "Yes, and you sent it to keep her quiet. Did it work?" "Clearly not," Margaret said. "I underestimated how much damage she was willing to do." Something shifted in his expression then. Not anger at Margaret. She could see that clearly. But anger in the vicinity of her, which was almost harder to sit with. He turned slightly toward the window and she waited. "I trusted this arrangement," he said. "I need the terms to remain clear between us." "They are clear," she said. "You kept information from me." "Yes, and I told you so directly as soon as I understood why it mattered." She kept her voice steady. "I am not going to apologize for the instinct that made me protect my sister. I am going to tell you that the instinct led me wrong and that it will not happen again." He turned back. He looked at her for a long moment, the full evaluating look, the one that went underneath things. "What do we do about Clara?" "We bring her here," Margaret said, "not as punishment. Because she is out of my sight and making decisions with people who are using her, and that is more dangerous than anything she would do under this roof." She paused. "And because I am not done being her sister regardless of what she has done." Corbin was quiet. "That will be difficult," he said. "She will make things harder." "Probably," Margaret said. "Most true things do." He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Write to her. Tell her she is coming to stay at Ashford Hall for the remainder of the summer. Do not give her a choice. And Vance. Ward can handle Vance," he said. "I am withdrawing from the offer entirely. I will write today. Brief, final, no explanation. Men like Vance lose their leverage the moment you stop negotiating." "We hold the land," he said. "We wait. When the route is announced publicly, the value speaks for itself. And the newspaper item, we do nothing about it," he said. "Responding gives it oxygen. The best answer to that kind of thing is time and visible stability." He looked at her. "Which we have." She felt the weight of that, the word "we," settling somewhere in the center of her chest. "All right," she said. She was writing the letter to Clara when Corbin came back through the door 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway and said, "The Pemberton dinner Thursday, will you come?" She looked up from the letter. "Of course. They have asked specifically." He paused. "Mrs. Pemberton told me at church that she found you remarkable." She used the word twice. She used it sincerely both times, Margaret said. I could tell. Something moved through his expression, warm and uncontrolled, and immediately reined in. "Yes," he said. "I imagine you could." He straightened. "Thursday, then Thursday," she said. He left. She looked back at the letter to Clara, at the blank space after "Dear Clara," where she had stopped writing when he came in, and she put her pen to the paper again and told herself that what was happening between her and Corbin Ashford was still fundamentally a practical arrangement, that the warmth was professional regard, that the "we" was contractual, that none of what she was feeling had been included in the terms. She wrote 2 full paragraphs before she put the pen down and admitted quietly and entirely to herself that she was lying. Clara arrived on a Friday. Margaret was at the gate when the hired carriage came up the drive because she had not trusted herself to wait inside, and because she had wanted to see her sister's face before anyone else did. Clara stepped down looking younger than Margaret remembered, and angrier than she had expected, which meant she was frightened, which meant she was Clara. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara said, "I suppose you think you have won." And Margaret looked at her sister at the defiance and the fear and the loneliness underneath both, and she said, "I think you made a mistake. I think someone used you to make it worse. And I think you are going to tell me everything starting now, because whatever happens next, we are going to handle it together, whether you want to or not." Clara's chin wobbled. She pressed it flat. "I did not know what he was going to do with it," she said. "Vance." "I did not know." "I know," Margaret said. "Come inside." She put her hand on her sister's arm and walked her toward the house, and she felt Clara resist for exactly one step before the resistance collapsed and she came. They were halfway up the front steps when the sound of a horse coming fast up the drive made Margaret turn. It was a rider from the Pemberton estate. He pulled up hard and called out before he had fully stopped. "Message for Mr. Ashford. Urgent from the capital." Margaret's hand tightened on Clara's arm. "I will take it," she said. Her voice was steady. It was always steady. The rider handed it down. She looked at the seal. It was from Samuel Ward. She opened it. She read it once. The ground did not shift beneath her, but it felt like it did. Ward was writing to say he had found something else. Something beyond Vance, beyond the road plan, beyond the newspaper item. Something in the deed records from 1813, buried in the original Ashford land transfer documentation. Something that, if Ward was reading it correctly, meant that the northern timber section had never been legally transferred to Corbin's name at all. And the man whose name was on the original title, recorded in the county records in a clerk's careful hand, was Roland Vance's father. Margaret read Ward's letter a second time, standing at the foot of the front steps with Clara's arm still in her hand, and the rider waiting and the summer heat pressing down on everything like a held breath. Then she folded it, put it in her coat pocket, and turned to the rider. "Tell Mr. Ward that Mr. Ashford will respond by tomorrow morning." "Thank you for your speed," the rider went. Clara was watching her with the particular wariness of someone who has learned to read weather in another person's face. "What is it?" "Come inside," Margaret said. "I need to find your brother-in-law." She settled Clara in the front parlor with Mrs. Finch, and strict instructions that no one was to disturb them. Then she went to find Corbin. He was in the far field with the overseer, and she walked the full quarter-mile without rushing, because she needed those minutes to think, to sort what she knew from what she suspected, and what she suspected from what she could prove. By the time she reached him, she had all three categories organized. He saw her coming and dismissed the overseer before she arrived, which told her he had read something in the way she was moving. He met her halfway. "Ward sent a rider," she said, and gave him the letter. She watched him read it. She watched the moment he reached the name, and she saw something happen in his face that she had never seen before. Not anger, not surprise, something older than both. Something that looked like a man recognizing finally the shape of something that had been wrong for years, without him knowing why. "Ezekiel Vance," he said. His voice was very quiet. "You know the name?" "My father purchased that section from him in 1813. Corbin said. He looked up from the letter. "He paid full market value. I have the receipt. I have my father's correspondence about the transaction." "Then the original title transfer was either never recorded correctly," Margaret said, "or someone altered the county records after the fact. Or," Corbin said, "Ezekiel Vance sold land he had already encumbered, land with a prior claim attached that he did not disclose, which would mean the sale was fraudulent from the beginning. And Roland Vance has known about it for years and has been waiting for the right moment to surface the title discrepancy until the road plan made the land worth enough to act on." Margaret said yes. He was quiet for 2 full beats. I need to go to the capital, he said. We need to go, Margaret said. He looked at her. The deed records are public documents, she said. Ward can pull them, but someone needs to cross-reference them against your father's estate papers, which are here. I know those papers. I organized them 6 weeks ago when I went through the full estate archive. He looked at her steadily. You need me there. 1 second. 2. How soon can you be ready? An hour, she said. 45 minutes, he said, and turned toward the house. She was ready in 38. She settled Clara before they left. She sat with her sister for 10 minutes and said plainly, and without anger, You met with Roland Vance. You gave him information about this household. I need you to tell me everything you told him, every conversation, every detail, every name he asked about. Write it down, all of it. When I come back, I need that paper. Clara's face went through several things. Defiance, shame, the particular expression of someone deciding if honesty is going to cost more than they can afford. Then she said, He told me he was a friend of Corbin's, that he was worried about you, that he just wanted to understand the situation, and you believed him. Clara stopped, started again. I wanted someone to be on my side. Margaret looked at her sister for a long moment. Write it down, she said again, quietly. All of it. That is how you start being on my side. She left before Clara could answer. The road to the capital was 8 hours in good conditions. They made it in 7, trading drivers at the halfway point. Margaret did not actually sleep. She sat with her back against the carriage wall and went through the estate archive in her memory, page by page, the way she had catalogued it in her first week, looking for what she had filed and where. Corbin did not sleep either. She could tell by his breathing. Somewhere around the 5th hour, he said, In the dark, you organized the estate archive in your first week. Yes, you said you went through everything prior to 1815. Everything I had reached, she said. I had not gotten to the earlier records yet. They were in worse condition, some water damage. I was going to get to them in September. But you remember what you saw? Yes. The 1813 land purchase from Ezekiel Vance, he said. Do you remember seeing the receipt? She thought. She went back through the specific shelf, the specific folder, the specific order of documents. It was in the 3rd folder from the left on the lower shelf, she said, behind the 1812 timber agreements. A single page, hand-signed, dated October 14th, 1813. The figure was $422. Silence. 422, he said. She paused. You remember it. My father made me read every major transaction document when I took over the estate, he said. He believed a man should know what he owned and what he paid for it. He was right, Margaret said. Another silence, softer than the earlier ones. Margaret, he said. Yes, when this is resolved, he stopped, started differently. There are things I should have said before now. She waited. The arrangement we made, he said, the terms we agreed to. I have been holding to them very carefully because they were what you agreed to, and I did not want to. He stopped again, and she heard in the stopping the effort of a man trying to be precise about something that resisted precision. I did not want to move the boundary without your permission. Her heart was doing something she was going to have to address later when she had more time and fewer crises. Which boundary? She said carefully. The one, he said, that keeps this a contract. The carriage hit a rut and swayed, and neither of them moved, and the darkness held the sentence like something fragile. We can talk about that, Margaret said finally. When we get back. Yes, he said, when this is settled. Yes. She looked at the dark window and felt the road moving under her, and told herself firmly that she was going to focus on Roland Vance and county deed records and the estate archive for the next 24 hours. She was almost entirely successful. Ward was a small, precise man with ink-stained fingers and the eyes of someone who had spent 40 years reading documents that people did not want read. He met them at his office at 7 in the morning with coffee and papers he had already pulled from the county records office and got straight to it because Margaret had written ahead asking him to. The original deed, he said, placing it on the table between them, is recorded in the county ledger as transferring from Ezekiel Vance to Harlan Ashford in October 1813, which matches your records. He put a second document beside it. This is a secondary document filed in the same ledger 14 months later. In December 1814, it records an encumbrance, a prior debt claim attached to that same parcel of land allegedly predating the 1813 sale. Margaret leaned forward. She read the December 1814 document carefully. Then she looked at both documents side by side. "The handwriting," she said. Ward looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "Yes," she said. "The October 1813 entry and the December 1814 entry were written by the same clerk, but the ink color is different, and the 1814 document uses a dating convention, the way the month is abbreviated, that matches the 1816 ledger entries I can see on this shelf, not the 1814 ones." Ward smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "I noticed the same thing this morning," he said, "which suggests the 1814 document's not filed in 1814. Corbin said. "It was filed later." "Backdated." "Yes," Ward said, "and there is one more thing." He put a third document down. Roland Vance filed a legal notice of title claim 6 weeks ago, quietly through a county clerk in a different district. The timing corresponds almost exactly with his approach to you about the purchase offer. "He came to buy it knowing he was about to claim it," Corbin said. "He came," Margaret said, "to see if you would sell cheaply before you discovered the claim. If you sold, he had the land without litigation. If you refused, she tapped the legal notice. He had this waiting." "Can we challenge the 1814 document?" Corbin asked Ward. "On the basis of the dating evidence, yes, strongly," Ward said. "I can have a counterfiling prepared by this afternoon. The ink analysis alone will raise serious questions. Combined with your original receipt and any correspondence your father kept about the transaction." "I have both," Margaret said. "The receipt and 3 letters from Harlan Ashford to a business associate discussing the purchase. They are in the estate archive. I can describe their exact location." Ward looked at her, then at Corbin, then back at her. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "I believe we have a case." They were at the county records office by 9 with Ward and a notary, and Margaret stood at the records table for 2 hours, cross-referencing every entry in the 1813 and 1814 ledgers, with the patience of a woman who had once spent an afternoon finding a $200 arithmetic error and considered this well within normal working parameters. By 11, she had found 2 more anomalies, small ones, easy to miss, but consistent with the pattern Ward had identified. The 1814 document had been inserted. The encumbrance was fabricated. She wrote it all down in her precise, even hand and gave the notes to Ward. At noon, Corbin filed the counterclaim. At 1 o'clock, Roland Vance arrived at Ward's office. Margaret was not surprised. Men like Vance had informants everywhere, and the moment a counterclaim appeared in the county records, word would have reached him. He was a large man, broad and ruddy-faced, with the manner of someone who had never had a plan fail in a way he had not anticipated. He walked into Ward's office and stopped when he saw Margaret sitting at the table, and something moved through his expression, not fear, but the first acknowledgement that a variable he had not accounted for was sitting 3 feet away from him. "Ashford," he said, looking past her at Corbin. "Vance," Corbin said. "I think there has been a misunderstanding about the title documents." "There has been no misunderstanding," Margaret said. Vance looked at her directly for the first time. "Mrs. Ashford, this is a legal matter." "I am aware of what it is," she said. "I am also aware that the December 1814 encumbrance document was filed after the fact, using a dating convention that did not come into use in this county until 1816, and that the ink pigmentation does not match any other document in that ledger, from the period in which it was allegedly written." She held his gaze. "I am also aware that you had 2 conversations with my sister in the capital in July, during which you obtained private information about this household, that you subsequently used to construct a strategy designed to pressure my husband into selling land cheaply before discovering a fraudulent title claim that your father manufactured and that you have been holding in reserve for years." The room was very quiet. "You are welcome to proceed to litigation," Margaret said. "Mr. Ward informs me the process will take approximately 18 months and will involve a full public examination of every document your father filed in this county between 1810 and 1820. She paused. "Or you can withdraw the title claim this afternoon in writing, witnessed and recorded, and we will consider the matter closed." Vance looked at Corbin. Corbin said nothing. He had said nothing for the last 3 minutes. And Margaret understood that this was deliberate, that he was giving her the floor, not because he could not speak, but because he had decided she had earned it. "She speaks for this household," Corbin said simply. "What she has said is what I would have said." Vance looked between them. Whatever calculation he was running took less time than Margaret expected. "I will need until tomorrow morning," he said. "You will have until 4 this afternoon," Margaret said. "The records office closes at 5. He left. Ward exhaled. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "I have been practicing law for 22 years, and," she said, "I would very much like to know where you studied." "I did not," she said. "I just paid attention." Vance's withdrawal was filed at 3:52. Margaret held the confirmed copy in her hands and felt something release in her chest. Not triumph, not exactly, but the particular relief of a problem correctly solved, which had always been the closest thing to satisfaction she knew. Corbin took the document from her gently. He looked at it, then he looked at her. "It is done," he said. "Yes, you did that." "We did that," she said. He shook his head slightly. "Margaret, I know what I contributed, and I know what you contributed. Do not minimize what you did." She looked at him. This man she had met 10 weeks ago in a study that smelled of old paper and summer heat. This man who had offered her a contract when what she needed was a way out. This man who had sat in the carriage for 7 hours and told her there were things he had not yet said. She felt the full weight of everything she had been not naming settle into something clear and undeniable. "All right," she said. "I did that." "Yes," he said, "you did." They were back at Ashford Hall by midnight. Clara was asleep in the guest room. Mrs. Finch had left cold food on the kitchen table and a lamp burning, which was her particular form of welcome. Margaret sat down and ate without ceremony, because she had not eaten since morning. Corbin sat across from her and ate too. It was late, and they were tired, and the crisis was finished. And in the quiet of the kitchen, with the lamp burning low between them, she thought that this ordinary, unglamorous, exhausted moment was the most honest thing she had experienced in months. "You said there were things you should have said before now," she said. He looked up. "In the carriage," she said. "You said when this is resolved." "Yes, it is resolved." He set down his fork. He looked at her with the full attention she had come to know as his particular form of honesty, the look that went underneath things, that had found her 10 weeks ago as something worth keeping. "I do not want a contract," he said. "I want what we have already built, which is more than I have known how to name, and I am not a man who is comfortable with things he cannot name." He paused. "But I would rather be uncomfortable and honest with you than comfortable and dishonest about what this has become." Margaret looked at him across the kitchen table in the lamplight, tired down to her bones and more certain than she had been of anything in her life. "The contract," she said, "has been irrelevant for weeks." Something moved through his face, something that had been held back a long time, controlled and careful, and finally released. "Yes," he said. "I stayed," she said, "because I chose to. Not because of the terms, not because of the debt or the title or any of it." She met his eyes. "I want you to understand that. I do," he said. "And I want you to understand that whatever I offered you at the beginning, the terms, the practical arrangement, the careful distance, I would take all of it back if I could. Not because it was not honest, but because you deserve to be chosen, not contracted." She stood up from the table and walked around it, and he stood, and she looked up at him in the low light and said, "Then choose me now. That is sufficient." He took her face in his hands with the careful deliberateness he brought to everything that mattered and said, "Margaret Hale Ashford, I choose you without terms, without conditions, without a document in sight." She put her hand against his chest over his heart and felt it beating, steady and real and present. "Good," she said. Outside, the Virginia night was warm and full of crickets and the distant sound of the creek that marked the county line. And inside Ashford Hall, a lamp burned in a kitchen where two people had begun as a transaction and had become, through honesty and stubbornness, and 5 minutes of careful arithmetic, and 7 hours in the dark, something neither of them had thought to plan for. They had not planned for truth. They had not planned for trust. They had not planned for the way a practical arrangement could become the most profound choice either of them had ever made. But some of the best things in a life are not planned. They are built slowly, carefully, incorrectly at first, and then more truly, by two people who decide against all reasonable expectation to keep showing up for each other until showing up becomes the only thing that makes sense. Corbin Ashford had offered Margaret Hale a contract. She had given him something better. She had given him the truth, every uncomfortable, uncategorizable, irreducible piece of it, and he had been wise enough, finally, to call that what it was, not a transaction, a marriage. If this story reached something real in you, subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next part. Drop the name of your city in the comments below, because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who walked into a difficult room and refused to leave until the truth was on the table, share this with them today.